Our first speaker of the afternoon, we've already seen this morning, a very worthy recipient of the CEIV award, so well done for that again. So we've got Sacha Christie. Sacha, as we heard this morning, is a repeat experience from UFO witness. She's extensive knowledge on the alien abduction phenomena, and she helps other experiencers and abductees come to terms with their experience of aliens. And today, as already hinted at, she's talking about alien abductions, absence of evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Sacha Christie.
Well, I hope that I can cash the checks that I was written for me. Throughout my time in ufology, I came to ufology about 2005 after a UFO sighting in 1997. But I've actually had weird experiences all my life, but couldn't place them. So throughout this talk, I'm going to reference people with no previous exposure to the abduction phenomenon in ufology. Quite a few times throughout, my interactions with people, they've come to me and they have absolutely no idea what is happening to them. They don't, like for example, my friend Paula now, she's a good friend. She'd never heard of Nick Pope. She'd never heard of Roswell. So there are people out there, believe it or not, who have absolutely no idea about anything to do with ufology. And it's happened a few times. So I'm going to reference those because, well, you'll see why as I go through this. So I've been given a litany of reasons as to why my experiences are not real. And I'm going to go through all of those reasons that have been given and explain why they're not real. So, here we go. Lucid dreaming. The consistent themes in the, in the cultural script that we've got, which references the Greys. I'm going to reference the Greys because they're the most commonly referred to alien species that we see. So, in the lucid dream, you normally have some kind of control, you still got your self-identity, and so these things, they always involve invasive medical procedures and the specific appearance of the Greys. This suggests either a shared cultural template as script or an underlying common experience. And one of the most prominent counter-arguments is it's just a dream, it's sleep paralysis. But the explanation is the concept, again, of a cultural script. But it falls flat when you talk to people who've had abduction experiences with no previous exposure to any of the subject. So while lucid dreams can be extremely realistic, the idea that people would dream the same beings and the same activities across different cultures, all while having their own names and maintaining their own identities, they have matching scenarios, it's just highly improbable. These dreams are highly individualistic and based around the dreamer's own life experience in the context of their own life. And the independent convergence of such specific and intricate details strains the credulity of a purely internal, random dream generation process. And these experiences are not culturally learned, yet they share the same commonalities. So an alternative explanation beyond individual dream states needs to be considered. So then the next one, sleep paralysis, which I have had sleep paralysis quite often, and it's usually when I've been given some sort of medication. Well, actually, I'll leave that a little bit. So if the abduction experience was solely a sleep paralysis hallucination, why would it consistently manifest Greys and performing the same medical procedures rather than, say, a medieval demon, a deceased relative, or some sort of blob? But they're all common themes in sleep paralysis hallucinations across the different cultures. And also, in sleep paralysis, you can't actually move. Where, in my experiences, I've been standing up, moving around, it's just, no, it doesn't fit. So, for people who genuinely have no prior interest or knowledge or exposure to UFOs or alien abduction accounts, or any media, which I know is difficult now, but when you look at people my age and above, we weren't exposed to all this, we didn't have social media, there was nothing on the TV like it is now. So, I'm kind of dealing with people my own age anyway, And I'm in my 50s now, so, you know, like Gen X boomers, we didn't have all this exposure. And the people that I talk to are generally around about my age. So, the cultural scripting argument, it collapses. Because without that script, how can the sleep paralysis spontaneously generate highly specific, detailed and recurring elements like the grays, the invasive reproductive examinations, the telepathic communication, missing time, you know, being aboard a craft. These are all consistent with other abductees' experiences, regardless of the cultural background. So this is right across the world, in all different cultures, in Africa, England, all over. Why are we coming up with the same script? So while sleep paralysis can create a profound sense of fear and helplessness, it rarely constructs a complex multi-stage narrative. Abduction accounts often include a coherent sequence, capture, transportation, specific types of examination, communication, and then return. And this goes significantly beyond the typical more fragmented and less detailed hallucinations associated with sleep paralysis, which are primarily characterised by the sensation of being paralysed and the general feeling of threat. And this explanation strains the credulity of purely physiological event, generating such consistent and highly detailed plots. So then, false memory syndrome. Just have a little drink before I get into this. So false memory syndrome, it has a pattern, it has a cause and a conclusion. So, the classic false memory syndrome model posits the process of gradual memory construction, often within a therapeutic context or through prolonged exposure to a suggested material. And in actual fact, false memory syndrome is a little bit like the insanity thing. It's purely for the courtroom. And this came up in the 80s when it came to child sexual abuse cases and, you know, dismissing victims' claims. So, many abductees report their initial experience as spontaneous, a sudden event, often occurring in childhood or adolescence, and prior to any interest, exposure or therapeutic intervention related to aliens or UFOs. For these individuals, there was no incubation period or external suggestions to plant the seeds of an alien abduction narrative, nor a medical condition driving the repetitive fabrication. For example, I had an experience and remembered it directly the next day. So that is not a false memory because it takes time. The very premise of the false memory syndrome relies heavily on external suggestion. If individuals have no prior knowledge of alien abduction law, how can specific details, again, grey aliens, medical probes, telepathy, missing time, etc., be suggested or implanted into their memory during their initial unprompted experience? False memories can occur, but their content is typically derived from existing knowledge, fears, or deliberate suggestion, none of which is present in the uninformed abductee. So, while memory is indeed reconstructive and susceptible to suggestion, meaning we can inadvertently add details to existing memories, or even create small false ones, this is different from the wholesale creation of an entire complex shared narrative that defines abduction accounts. So, in conclusion, while false memories are a real psychological phenomenon and can influence how memories are retrieved or elaborated over time, the false memory syndrome explanation fails to account for the absence of external suggestion necessary for the formation of such specific and detailed false memories, especially in uninformed cases. And the striking commonalities of content, again, the grey archetypes, specific procedures, etc., it lacks any pre-existing cultural scripts of an alien abduction. False memories are built over time, and they involve suggestion from external influences, and they are not spontaneous. And there are no diagnostic criteria, no validated assessment methods, and no treatment protocol. It is not a coherent or measurable clinical construct. A syndrome implies a consistent set of symptoms, a known cause and a cause. So, hallucinations. I was told, we had a UFO sighting in Wales. There was a group of us, or 6 people. We were told it was a group hallucination. I was like, I don't even know how that works. Anyway, so, hallucinations beyond sleep paralysis. And this is the dismissal. So sometimes claims are attributed to broader categories of hallucinations and not specifically tied to sleep. These could be visual, auditory or somatic, and they occur during full wakefulness, and possibly due to migraine auras. Some types of migraines can cause visual disturbances, flashing lights, zigzags, very strange kind of visual patterns, and altered states of consciousness. Temporal lobe activity seizures. Temporal lobes of the brain are strongly linked to mystical experiences, out-of-body sensations, vivid memories, and even perceived presences. Some researchers, like Michael Persinger with his God helmet experiments, have shown that stimulating the temporal lobes with weak magnetic fields can induce experiences reported as alien encounters or religious visions. The dismissal here is the abductees experiencing a temporary localised brain anomaly that generates these perceptions, which are then interpreted as an abduction. And I'll give you an example, because I suffer from tonic-clonic seizures during sleep. Recently, past 6 months, I had one of these events, and in my dream, presented a scenario to go with the bodily sensation of the kind of electrical pulses that I feel, which causes the rigidity and the relax and rigidity and relax. And so the dream was, I was in an underground facility, very much like the one that Eleven was kept in Stranger Things. So I think that's the imagery is matching this. There's doctors, they're all in white coats, they've got their badges, it's very, very detailed. And I'm running away from them. And I can't run. So I've got a slightly dislocated hip, I've got a reconstructed knee, I don't run. So I definitely wasn't running. And I heard, as I was escaping, I heard taser. And then I had the pulsing. And I was so mad that I wouldn't go down, I didn't fall. And then, you know, the next day I woke up and I thought, wow, that was a crazy dream. So I'm typing it out on Facebook, and then I thought, wait a minute, that wasn't a dream, that was an actual physical event, because I actually felt this. And after the event, my sense of smell was absolutely epic, and I felt very, very ill for a good week or so. So it was a tonic seizure. But I put this on Facebook, and of course straight away people saying, well, don't think that was a dream, because they will fill in all these gaps in the narrative for me. Everybody has got a script written for me, and that would be a MyLab. Now I've had MyLabs, and it's not like that, but you know, I could have, and then probably would have in the past, attributed that to an experience, because I didn't have a clue. And so everything that was going on was weird. I've even had another seizure where I lived in actually a very haunted house at the time, and I put it down to a paranormal experience, which is kind of dangerous, because this is, you know, this is my health. But when you kind of have this sort of thing going on in your life and you don't really know what it is, there are parts of it where you assume a lot of what you go through is paranormal or connected to the phenomena, but it isn't. But because you're connected to the phenomena, the brain will present situations that are similar. So I could build a bigger narrative of my experiences, of my life, using these things which were not actual. So, you know, there is that kind of danger, and I think a lot of people do that, but they're not lying, they're just not, you know, mistaken, or you know, when you're kind of in that heightened state of nervousness because it's so unpredictable and you don't really ever feel safe when you're being abducted. It's like, you know, I recently spoke to a psychologist, Don Stubbins, and he said, what's it like? I said, well, the only thing I can liken it to is like being homeless and living on the streets. Because when you have an abduction experience, it doesn't matter if you lock your door. Your walls don't keep anything out, you know, the doors don't keep anything out. These things can still enter your home, so you might as well just be exposed to all the elements, and that's what it feels like. So anyway, drug-induced hallucinations. Although less common as a universal explanation, some dismissals might suggest the influence of psychoactive substances, even if unknowingly ingested or from past use. A lot of people put these experiences down to like kind of spiritual things, but It's an actual physical event. It's another being, a physical being. I don't see it as a spiritual thing, and I feel that it would be like building a spiritual belief around a dentist or a surgeon, So, why it's insufficient for uninformed abductees. And similar to sleep paralysis, if these are just general hallucinations, why do they converge in such specific and complex narratives? Again, grades, medical procedures, specific communications, missing time. And across multiple unrelated individuals who have no prior knowledge of such cultural tropes or each other, the temporal lobe seizure might produce vivid, otherworldly sensation, but it wouldn't inherently produce the exact narrative of an alien reproduction exam. The consistency of the content remains the challenge. The brain anomaly theory explains that a strange experience occurred, but not why the strange experience. It consistently takes the specific form of an alien abduction, especially for people without prior knowledge. So, psychopathology or mental illness. So the dismissal is that in the past, sometimes still today, individuals reporting alien abduction experiences were dismissed as being mentally ill, perhaps suffering from delusions, psychosis, or other severe psychiatric conditions, which actually happens and has happened to me. Because if you think about it, something like this, it's so polarising, it's very deconstructing. It dismantles everything that you are, who you are, and everything that you believe or thought you knew about the world. It takes everything away from you. I find it very hard to engage with people who say that everything's spiritual and, kind of end up being psychic healers and all that, which we often do. But I don't, even if your experience was positive, it would still be a deconstructive experience, because knowing and believing something are two completely different things, and when you're actually faced with this thing, it's a shock. And I actually know somebody who had the most amazing experience, golden light, all the rest of it. They're in the car in Ingleton, driving along, there's a big golden light, and they feel the most comforting sense of love and acceptance and safety. Then, after this experience where they're all in this light, the woman who was sat in the passenger seat sat in the driver's seat, and the woman who was driving was just wandering around confused in the middle of the road. And there's two children with them, and they're still sat in the back of the car. And that doesn't sound very benevolent to me. Somebody wandering around on the road in a complete state of confusion. Then afterwards, the lady who was the passenger suffered the most chronic depression for a long, long time. And every time she spoke about it, she cried, because they just left her here in all this, and she'll never feel like that again. Now, to me, our bodies produce our feelings. That was a cascade of hormones, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, all the rest of it, that made her feel like this. So, it was a trick. I think it was a trick to make you feel comfortable, because if it was truly benevolent, she would not have been in the driver's seat, and the driver wouldn't have been wandering around in the road confused. How dangerous is that? So it doesn't feel benevolent to me, but she felt like it was benevolent. But even if it was a truly benevolent alien species, they have absolutely changed your life. If you think about Star Trek, we've got the no contact thing, because of what it does to a person or what it would do to society. So I really struggle with that, and especially her experience of that, just because of how dangerous the situation was that they were left in. If a car was coming in the other way, it should have been knocked over. So I don't feel that there was any care involved in that at all. So, why it's insufficient for uninformed abductees. Numerous studies, including work by psychiatrist John Mack, have consistently shown that as a group of individuals who report alien abduction experiences, they're no more likely to suffer from severe psychopathology than the general population. So while some individuals may have pre-existing conditions, the vast majority are psychologically healthy, but you would still be affected. Attributing the experience to mental illness is a broad brushstroke that fails to explain the commonalities among largely healthy population, and it also stigmatises experiences, often preventing us from seeking genuine support. And it's a convenient but often unsupported dismissal. Hoaxing and deliberate fabrication. Dismissal. Some skeptics suggest that individuals invent or exaggerate their stories for attention, financial gain, or psychological gratification. Now, I think that some people do this, but I also think that some people do it kind of accidentally. They don't really mean to. I've done it myself. I've attributed things to being paranormal or alien because there was a time when I was in such a heightened state because of it all that every single thing that happened was weird. And I'll tell you, the psychosis is real, and it's not like you're inventing things in your head, it's that you're in this like severely heightened state. And I'll give you an example. So in the very late 90s, early 2000s, I'm not sure exactly, probably about 98, 1999, I was extremely disturbed by my experiences. It was just a couple of years after the event that we'd had in Wales, which was this huge UFO, which was like a mile across at least. And then there was a sphere on the ground behind us, which was literally only about 20 feet away. I can't even tell you what it did to me. But, so, I'd sit in my living room in silence, listening, because I wanted to hear if anything was coming, and I was just on high alert constantly. I had a little window with my living room door, and I used to look out at the sky. And this particular night, I'd been sat there, I don't even know how long, and I decided I needed a drink of water. So I'm walking from my sofa to the kitchen, and as I'm walking, I had this and I stopped. And I was like, what's that? And I stood there for ages listening, and hear it again. And as soon as I started moving, and I thought, it's waiting until I move I don't know what it is, but I was waiting until I move to do whatever it's doing to freak me out or whatever. And actually, it was because I was wearing corduroy trousers and my legs were rubbing together. But to me, it was like, oh my God, what's up? But that is because of the heightened state that I was in, because I was afraid of everything by then. Like, literally afraid of my own shadow and corduroy trousers. So, right, why it's insufficient, especially for uninformed abductees. So while hoaxes are unveiled and now they exist, in any field, this explanation doesn't account for all the abductees who report experiences spontaneously and privately, initially expressing fear, confusion, rather than a desire for publicity. But you see, when you come to ufology and you're like, I've had these experiences, no one believes you. You have to be kind of like dismantled by ufology, and if you survive the dismantling, then people might believe you. But then they'll still tell you all these things as to why it is, and that it's not real and you are mistaken, and that you're a completely unreliable witness to your own life. And they always know better than you do about what's happened to you, even though they didn't see it. I always find that was really funny. So there's no financial gain, we all know that, don't we? So you can't really gain anything from it. I mean, I think people think that there's a lot of money in it, but there isn't. And the other problem is that the reaction that you get from people, like, I've lost my entire family because of this. It's embarrassing, it's cringe, it's whatever, they like don't like it, but then privately my mum will tell me about her experiences. So, it's just that it is the embarrassment of it. And I do find it embarrassing sometimes, and I just think, well, it is what it is, and I'm not lying, but that's up to you to believe me or not. And if you don't, I get it, I understand why. So, the distress, the trauma, it's just so, like I say, it just dismantles everything, who you are, what you think. So a lot of people reported these events before the concept of alien abduction was widely popularised or understood. although it's very difficult now to kind of escape it, like I say, people my age and above, it wasn't everywhere. So for individuals who genuinely believe their experiences and have no prior agenda, hopes, it's just an unsupported dismissal. Fantasy proneness, disassociation, high suggestibility. So the dismissal. Some psychological theories suggest that abductees may be prone to fantasy, easily absorbed in imaginative states, have a tendency towards dissociative experiences, which is a detachment from reality and memory gaps, or are highly hypnotically suggestible. And these traits are seen as predisposed individuals to interpret unusual experiences in a fantastical way, or to fill in gaps with vivid alien-themed content, particularly under hypnosis. So, like I've just said to you, giving you like real-world examples for my own. I've had to, I created an entire narrative for myself. It was all Space Brothers, it was benevolent, and it was a comfort zone, it wasn't true. And there were things that people were telling me, oh, well, you'll have implants and they'll be up your nose and, and I was like, oh, right, because I didn't know. I didn't know anything when I first came to ufology. So, I believed it all and I added it all in. So this was my story. But actually, my experiences, the memories of them, I've got quite a lot of memories, but they're very disjointed and there's no full, like movie script or anything. It's like snapshot, snapshot, snapshot. So, I filled in the gaps, but then I was like, well, actually, it doesn't feel benevolent. And that doesn't really feel right. So when I got the grip, I took out all of the stuff that I'd added in that other people had given me and went back to, this is what I remember, and that is it. So why is this insufficient for uninformed abductees? So, while these personality traits might correlate with reporting unusual experiences, they don't explain specific shared content of abduction narratives for individuals with no prior alien knowledge. I know I keep saying it, but it's really important. Fantasy-prone individuals can fantasise about anything, and like I say, I've done it myself. High suggestibility means that they can be influenced by ideas. If they have no prior idea of grey aliens or their reproductive experiments, how do these specific details consistently emerge? It returns to the cultural scripts problem. If the script isn't there in the individual's mind, these traits don't explain why the experiences consistently take on this abduction narrative rather than any other fantasy or hallucination. So, in essence, dismissals often provide a category, e.g. it's hallucination, false memory, etc., but fall short of providing a causal mechanism for the specific shared content when the cultural pre-exposure is absent. They explain away the experience by labelling it, but the underlying why that specific label for the uninformed remains open. The mind's capacity for inducing physical, psychological trauma. The problem, abduction experiences, regardless of their origin, consistently result in real, measurable, and often debilitating psychological traumas, PTSD-like symptoms, anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, relationship issues, and a profound sense of violation. Furthermore, some experiences report physical marks, although these are often dismissed. The unexplained aspect. If the mind can generate such an incredibly realistic and traumatic virtual reality that mirrors an external violation so precisely, without any external physical input, then our understanding of psychosomatic responses and the brain's power to inflict self-trauma is dramatically underestimated. We understand trauma from external events, but to suggest that the mind can spontaneously create an internal event that mimics such a profound external trauma in its psychological and even physical manifestations is a leap, and we don't fully comprehend or acknowledge. It implies a hyper-realistic internal generator of trauma that current medical models struggle to account for. So, the archetypes, I love this one. Pre-modernity, so fairies, elves, demons, jinn, ancestors, spirits. In earlier eras, when the unknown was often spiritual or supernatural and the world was perceived as populated by unseen forces, encounters were interpreted as fairies, elves, demons, or various spiritual entities. These beings often abducted people, e.g. to fairyland, performed strange experiments, or imparted mysterious knowledge. Modernity, the aliens. With the advent of science, space exploration, and a more secular worldview, the unknown shifted from the spiritual realm to the vastness of space. Consequently, the archetypal otherworldly being updated itself to an alien, a technologically advanced extraterrestrial, and the abduction now involves spaceships, scientific experiments, and genetic experiments. And the core claim is that the underlying experience is the same, an encounter with a powerful non-human other that feels real, but is internally generated or culturally influenced. But the interpretation changes based on cultural context. Therefore, an alien encounter is simply the modern brain's way of processing an ancient archetypal experience. Whether you call them fairies, jinn, or aliens, the core phenomenon being described is an interaction with a non-human, intelligent entity that operates outside of our normal physical laws, exerts control over individuals, transports them, performs inexplicable actions, and by the very definitions often applied to the alien, is an entity from elsewhere, distinct from human life, often technologically superior or possessing unusual abilities. These folkloric beings fit the bill. If the underlying concept of an alien, a non-human interfering powerful entity, is present across these different historical interpretations, then the modern archetype argument validates the presence of such an entity. It downplays the specific shared and intricate details that characterise alien abduction narratives, particularly the grey archetype and precise medical procedures. This is simply shifting the problem and not solving it. It substitutes one mystery, like aliens, with another, equally profound and unexplained one. Memories. How can we tell if they are real? Well, we can. We have to look for internal consistency with a memory narrative over time and richness of the sensory and contextual details. So for me, you can tell me your experience and I will believe you until there's a shift, a change in the pattern, and then I'll be suspicious. So if a false memory had developed over time and the person genuinely believes that their false memory is real, then they will always look like they are telling the truth because they believe what they're saying. So they're being honest and not lying, which includes all the physical tells of body language. So you, they were definitely telling the truth, I could just tell by the way they were, yeah, because they actually believe it. So if we were to develop a methodology for determining the authenticity of a memory, we would have to determine a person's susceptibility to suggestion. And a lot of current methods of memory retrieval are often done with somebody who has a biased interest and can lead the subject towards a narrative that fits their bias, especially where hypnosis is concerned. Everyone involved in the abduction research has a vested interest, and often, I'm not saying always, I should have put often there, but I didn't, often no qualifications in either interview techniques or psychological assessments. So, the challenges in forensic examination of anomalous experiences. We lack baseline data. For a proper comparison, tests at hormonal levels, hemoglobin, white cells, histamine activation, thyroid function, lipids, they all require a baseline for the individual, which is typically absent, and specific lab testing issues. It's unclear what we're looking for. Unidentified compounds, isotopic anomalies, radiation signatures, nanotech, obvious genetic alterations, novel cell types, or altered hematology. This assumes that the alien technology is both different enough to be detectable by current analytical methods and not so alien as to be uninterpretable. So the nature of alien technology and trace evidence, and based on my own experiences, light and frequency are used for most alien interactions and leaving no typical forensic traces. They can alter matter and control light at a subatomic level, leaving no trace except occasional marks and bruising, which cannot be irrefutably proven as alien. So from my own experiences, I came face to face with a grey, and it was wearing a silver suit and a helmet, and I was like, that is ridiculous. No one is going to believe it. And it looked at me and it was like, boom. No words, just this unfolding. It was like remembering something. And it told me all these things about itself, why it was wearing this, what the helmet, how their bodies worked, all the rest of it. It's just like a information transfer. And it literally dumbed it down for me So it was like, it can bend light on a photon level. So when I kind of started looking at this memory, rather than recalling what I understood in the moment as it was happening, I was looking at it, I was like, okay, so it showed me that it's like an internal mechanism, there's like little bubbles, what are the bubbles? Gas, there's a gas exchange. It's like, at the time, I wasn't like switched on. I think I was so traumatised that I couldn't actually think properly. So I've kind of come out of that quite a lot now, because that was in 2012. So when I look at this memory now, it's very different to what I was experiencing in the moment. So the information is there, and I can recognise it. So the logistical barriers and the lack of amenities is the issue. So most laboratories are not a one-stop shop. Samples would need to be sent to various specialised facilities. Labs would need to agree to the unconventional reasoning behind the tests, which if we look at Councillor Clark, who she is the woman who has experienced this huge UFO in Penturk, and she wanted to have lie detector test, and no one would do it because of the subject matter. In the end, she managed to convince someone to do it without any prior knowledge of why she wanted this done or what she was going to say. Eventually she did, and she passed. Also, standard blood tests are very specific in the methodology. You can't just send a sample of blood in and say, test it for everything. Because the different equipment they use, the different techniques they use for each individual blood test, you know, it's not the same thing. If we were in Star Trek, we could have a full spectrum analysis. But we can't do that, and we don't even know what we're looking for. Anyway, what are we looking for? I don't know. So, normal blood tests often fall within a wide population range as well. So anybody who's chronically ill will tell you every time you go to the doctors and they go, it's normal. Because it's such a wide range for the population. So future options for determining anomalous experiences. We've got emerging AI technologies, and AI offers a path forward for investigating anomalous experiences with brainwave pattern recreation. So I remember in 2006, I was reading about these technologies that they were working on to read brainwave patterns and recreate images that a person is thinking of. You know what I'm saying? I just wish I could show you what I saw. Well, these technologies are now emerging that are allowing for the recreation of memories using mapped brainwave patterns. At this current moment in time, it has to be modelled on a specific individual. So they would have to get to know my brainwave patterns. It's not applicable to, like, you couldn't hook anyone up and they go, right, okay. So you have to know, because we all have different ways that our brains work, and so the brainwave patterns are different for each individual. So if the machine's learning can get to know you and your brainwave patterns, it can map your brainwave patterns and recreate images currently that you're looking at, you know, physically in front of you. But the way that it's moving forward is that one day, we're going to be sat there, hooked up, and we're going to think about our memories, and it's going to be able to show what we're looking at, what we're remembering, sorry. Emerging technologies for understanding memory formation. Functional magnetic resonant imaging measures brain activity by detecting changes associated with blood flow used to identify brain regions more active during recall of true versus false memories. Now, memories are not stored in a place. The brain activity shows when you're remembering something, it comes from everywhere. To distinguish true versus false memories. True memories often linked to higher activation in medial temporal lobe regions, especially the hippocampus and the parahippocampal gyrus, indicating recollection with rich contextual details. False memories, often linked to higher activation in the prefrontal cortex and parietal regions, indicating a familiarity that lacks a specific contextual detail. So we'll talk a lot. So electrical signals in the human hippocampus can differ immediately before recollection of true and false memories. So basically, these technologies are looking at our brainwave patterns, and they can tell us how that ended up in there, whether you were awake, asleep, whether it was generated over time and is now a false memory, possibly even implanted, because the way these technologies go in is going to be like Minority Report, basically. You know, these technologies are exciting, and you know, I'm particularly looking forward to this kind of technology, because I would expect everybody who's made claims in ufology or in the abduction scene to be queuing up to have this done, to prove themselves, because especially when you've been called a liar or whatever, but more importantly, to be able to show people what I actually saw. When we were in Wales and we saw this UFO, it was this absolutely insane light display within the cloud. And because of the different densities of the clouds, these rippling lights, it's very hard to describe what we saw. I would really love to somebody put a probe in my brain and I'll say, there you go, that's what we saw. And then for another technology to say, that's real, that was actual, seen with the eyes. So, right. Distinguishing true versus false memories. True memories are often linked to higher activation in medial temporal lobe. I think I've done that bit, haven't I? So, electrical signals, everything's different before and after. So the EEG and magnetoencephalography, that word. These techniques measure electrical activity and magnetic fields of the brain. They offer excellent temporal resolution to observe rapid brain processes associated with memory retrieval, identifying distinct patterns of neural oscillation. Intracranial EEG. For patients undergoing brain surgery, electrodes placed directly or in the brain provide highly precise and direct measurements of neural signals from deep brain structures like the hippocampus, offering localized activity data for distinguishing true from false memories. I think that's really exciting. I think that's amazing. You know, because ufology is so messed up, because people, you know, there's a lot of reasons why this stuff exists in ufology, and a lot of it's because people think their lives are too mundane and they want to spice it up a little bit, or, you know, like for me in the early days when I kind of added things in or whatever, it would help me determine what was real and what was not real. You know, because I attributed a lot of things to a paranormal, because I've had paranormal experiences as well all my life from being a little kid, you know, like ghosty stuff. And I would like to know if all of that was real, or which is real and which is not, because if I can pull it apart and say, oh, that horrific thing was like a dream or whatever, then that makes my life better, doesn't it? Because that wasn't real. And then I feel better about things, because, you know, you don't want the horror. So, source monitoring framework. The psychological theory suggests memories are reconstructed experiences. Authenticity is determined by characteristics like sensory details, emotional intensity, contextual information, and self-reference. False memories often lack these detailed source tags. Memory misattribution and cryptomnesia studies. Experimental designs create false memories or instances of unconscious plagiarism. Observing their formation and associated confidence levels provides insight into cognitive processes. And contextual details and confidence. Generally, true memories tend to have a richer sensory and contextual detail, while high confidence can exist for false memories. The type of detail recalled can differ. Memory is inherently subjective. Interpreting brain signals into a definitive true or false or dream verdict remains a significant challenge, but that is where they're going. Similarity of neural signatures, so true, false and imaginary memories can activate from many of the same brain regions, making precise differentiation difficult. So subtle differences in activity patterns or timing are key. The context and suggestion. Memory formation and recall are highly susceptible to suggestion. Technologies must be used in carefully controlled environments to minimise external influences. And the ethical concerns are the ability to read or even implant memories raises profound ethical questions about privacy, consent, and the definition of personal identity, but also screen memories. They're implanted. You could literally change people's memories. So, now I'm going to show you a little bit of a video because currently, where we're at with this imagery generation, I think it's really stunning. It's not quite there yet, and the way that they're going is like, well, everything that I've said. We are soon, or one day, maybe not even, you know, in my time, eventually, people like me will be able to go somewhere, and hopefully somebody who's got a little bit of this and an interest in the subject will have the facility or the ability to hook somebody up and let the things play out that they've seen, recalling the memories, and then we'll be able to determine whether it was real, imagined, fake, implanted, dream, whatever. And, you know, and I think that'll be helpful, but also it'll help us kind of develop a context for psychological recovery, because there isn't one currently. And if you have a complete breakdown because of this kind of thing, well, good luck, you're on your own. So, can we play the video?
On the campus of the National University of Singapore, Professor Helen Zhao and a team of researchers say artificial intelligence is letting them see, well, a version of our thoughts. This subject demonstrated the process.
Our colleague Eric right now is inside the scanner.
Using a database of fMRI scans, the AI first got to see what people's brains looked like as they viewed more than 1,000 photos. Then, it was shown only brain scans as the subjects looked at new photos. Using a special language of brain activity the team developed, an image generator called Stable Diffusion then tried to recreate what each new photo had shown.
Wow, so as long as I have seen it and you know the patterns of my brain, then the AI will read that out of my brain.
Yes, exactly.
Scientists have pursued this for years, but AI makes the difference. Here's a giraffe shown to a subject. Now, ready? Here's the image the AI created. And it is sometimes very different between people. Here's the original image of a grassy field. Now here's 3 different versions generated from 3 different people's brain activity. Now, what you're seeing is a recording of previous scans, not a real-time demonstration. And this process is slow, it requires an expensive machine, and it has to be individually tailored.
So unless you have taken a long time to train the model on an individual, it doesn't work.
Yes, at least at this stage, but we're trying to generalize across subjects in the future.
On the campus of the National University.
So, going back over everything that I've said, all of the different reasons that I've been given for why my experiences are not real, how likely is it that the cultural script of the grey aliens, the examinations, the hybrid stuff, all of it, how likely is it that that script would appear in all of them? Across the world, throughout different people, with very different backgrounds of life and experiences, how likely is that? I think it's about as likely, or it's more, that the experiences that we have are more likely than that cultural script existing throughout all of those conditions or all of those reasons that have been given. It just seems absolutely impossible to me that this narrative would appear in every single one. So to me, they're all a write-off, because how is that? How can that be? And I know that some people are literally prone to fantasy, or maybe, you know, want to feel a little bit more interesting or whatever, and you know, that's fair enough, but at the same time, it's very polluting in the scene. Now, people can, like, you know, be a little bit stressed out about my narratives, because I'm also dismissing what they're saying to me. But this is everything that I've ever been told throughout my time in ufology as to why my experiences are not real. And mostly the shift goes over to spirituality, which these are real physical beings. They have absolutely no capacity for emotion. They're not evil, not bad, their emotion gets in the way of logic and function. And that is what I've been told. This is why they have no emotion. They're not evil, they're not dark, and they're not negative. My reaction to them is negative, but they have been created to serve a function. Who created them? You know. But their physiological aspects of their bodies are that they can exist in very many scenarios. The way they get their energy is through light. Everything that they do is through light and frequency, so they're never going to leave any trace of anything in the body. You know, they can modulate frequency, they can change the nature of cells, they can change the nature of matter so that people can go through glass and brick and the rest of it. So they're not going to leave a trace. They're godlike. They're not gods, but they are godlike. And that is the end of my talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Sacha. She was actually 22 seconds over her allotted time, so that's brilliant. So we've got an 8-minute break now before the next talk. We've had some excellent